Right now, like in the drawing, I'm just trying to work on some of the dark halftones, like some of these areas just around the edge of the shadow, to see if I can get the kind of form to turn just the way that I want it to. And then also kind of working on the specificity of some of the shadow edges. See if I can get them to really kind of sing a bit, you know? It's always kind of a tricky time in the drawing. Like nowadays with my drawings, I've been doing this for a very long time, you know, so I mean, there are stages to the drawing, but I think stages are kind of most useful when you're a student and you're trying to think of what this moment of the drawing means, or what it looks like to conceptualize a drawing. So I could say like how long overall it takes me to draw, but like how long a particular stage takes, you know, eventually just takes however long it takes for me to get it right. And, you know, sometimes that's very fast, you know, and depending upon like how I'm working, you know, it can be very fast or it can be incredibly slow. It's also about the kind of like effect that you're trying to get at the end. You know, you're trying to get this sense that, you know, like in my drawings, I'm usually trying for this like really refined sense of like light kind of pouring over the top of the form. And you'll see like areas like this where I'm letting the light flow through a little bit more. And then there's areas that are more kind of cut away into shadow. So like, I feel like building up a drawing like that actually takes quite a long time. Whereas if I'm kind of going for a bit of a different effect, you know, it could be a much faster drawing. Someone's asking about mechanical pencils. It's not that I necessarily like, well, you know what, I guess I do prefer them a bit. It's only so that I don't have to sharpen all the time. Like this has sort of 2B lead in it. So like, you know, if I was using 2B lead in this way, like it would take me a long time, you know, to sharpen. Like every time I got that very soft lead to be blunted by kind of adding halftone. So maybe it's a little bit more of just a practical choice than anything like aesthetic, you know. Also, like I think it's nice to have a kind of a chemistry with your teacher, so that you have, I mean, so much of like kind of conveying ideas, you know, for artists, it's about, you got to be able to kind of speak the language of the person you're working with. What portrait painter do I like, and what do you like about him or her? Man, there's a lot. There's a lot of like contemporary painters that I think I'm really, really into, and also a lot of historical artists. You know, studying, when I studied painting and drawing, I studied in Italy, and so in Florence specifically. So there's a lot of like 19th century Italian painters that made a really big impression on me. Even if like nowadays maybe the perspective that I have about artwork maybe is one that has probably more of a kind of slightly contemporary feeling to it, which is very, you know, very much, you know, it's on purpose, you know, like I kind of sought after a little bit of a more modern feeling. So, yeah, what was I saying? Oh yeah, artists that I thought influenced me. Yeah, I mean, you could look at, I don't know if anybody will know these off the top of their head, and probably if I just say them, maybe you won't have a chance to kind of remember them too well, but there's an Italian painter called Favretto, and that's Favretto, who between him and a guy called Giacomo Grosso, Grosso, I think they're I would definitely count them as like really big influences, and also then a non-Italian art, but nonetheless another 19th century artist that I think is really excellent. Kind of, I think the aesthetic of his work influences me a lot. Is Solomon J. Solomon. He was an English painter in the 19th century. I don't think he was English by birth. I think he was an immigrant to England. Just in terms of his like sense of design and clarity, it's just, it's something that I'm constantly trying to get to myself. I think that's what a lot of historical artists are for us. Is like these benchmarks where you kind of look to them and you look at your drawing and you kind of compare it to your own, and you think, oh, I can get so much better if I could get to where this man or woman was. I'd be really happy about it. But of course, it's not that you ever like get to, being Solomon J. Solomon. It's just, I think he just has a certain quality or a certain aesthetic that like is really interesting. Would I recommend studying in Italy? Was it a real game changer? Originally I'm from Miami, Florida. So going to Florence to study art was absolutely, it's an understatement to say it was a big game changer. It was more than that. It was just a place that kind of showed me that you could be an artist. Like people did that with their lives. In Miami, there's not like a lot of, for me at least, for what I wanted to do, there's not a lot of evidence of that, You don't, growing up, I didn't know any realist painters. I'm old enough that when I was very young, there was not really the internet, so I didn't necessarily have access to to find out about, contemporary realist painters, the few that there were in the 80s and 90s. So Italy, like, kind of opened my eyes to that. And there's a guy that, if you don't know who it is, it's no big deal, but he's the guy that started the Florence Academy. His name is Daniel Graves. He's on Instagram as well. You can give him a follow. But he started the Florence Academy maybe almost 30 years ago or something, and it kind of put training like this on the map again. There were a couple like small places in the States that were doing it, but the school, precisely the school I went to, is the Florence Academy of Art. I still teach there. My studio that I'm drawing in right now actually is in there's a campus that we have in the US now. And that's where I am right now. Another artist that I was just actually going through some of my old boxes and things from when we moved over here to the States. And this is one that probably nobody really has heard of. I'm just going to digress. Yeah, I do like Russian academic drawing. I think it's really fantastic. It's a massive inspiration to me. The clarity of thought and design, there's huge inspiration. It just, incalculable inspiration to me. Though I've never actually studied with any experts in that particular like discipline that came from that background. But yeah, no, I think it's amazing stuff. But yeah, I was saying one of the artists probably almost nobody really knows about, and it's, you know, she's a Danish painter, 19th century again, called Berta Vegman. That Vegman is pronounced Vegman, but it's spelled with a W, right? So, and Berta is like Bertha. I think if you're American, you'd read it as like Bertha, but the pronunciation in Denmark is Berta Vegman. She's really exceptional, really fantastic artist. Yeah, the biggest size of paper that I use, I don't know. The paper I use is kind of depends upon the size of drawing that I'm doing. So if I'm doing like this head, you can see is like, it's not enormous, you know. It's probably the size of my fist about, right? You know, the paper itself, if you zoomed out, it's maybe 3 times that height or something. Going to, like, my work is very kind of shapy, right? Like, I tend to be, you know, kind of a bit stronger in terms of like planes and shapes than maybe some other drawings. But I think it's a lot like, for me, it's a lot like the way that painters, you know, oil painters, myself included, will like kind of leave behind a brush stroke in a way, you know, like shapes like this and things. Normally, I think when you're doing a very refined drawing, I think people want to kind of remove or eradicate information like that. But to me, I kind of feel like that's that's part of what helps express like what's really beautiful in a drawing, you know. And so I don't want to diminish that. I want to like accentuate that, because there is like a bit of a perhaps not on social media, but like in my experience in the gallery world, like there's a lot of what's the word? Maybe there's a lack of enthusiasm about kind of works on paper, or drawings in particular. It's not that nobody will work with it, but I just think it's a little bit. I've noticed that it's a little bit less enticing to galleries than, say, an oil painting, which is fine, but. Again, that we are in the 21st century, like, you know, drawings are not just made for preparations now. Like, they can be, I feel like they're their own kind of art form, you know? No, but I think there's some artists out there that are really kind of pushing those boundaries and doing a great job. I imagine that if you're on Instagram and you know who I am, you probably know who Colleen Berry is. She's another one who's like, I think she really pushes the boundaries, I think, in, you know, in terms of drawing, being a very expressive medium. She's really amazing. So yeah, I mean, every time that I meet a new gallerist, and which is that's fairly often. I mean, you live in the New York area, you wind up kind of meeting a lot of people. I kind of ask them, even if I'm like not necessarily that I'll ever be working with them or anything, just like to ask them like what their thoughts about kind of works on paper are. And usually the response tends to be like, if they are like even attuned to works on paper, they'll start talking about watercolor paintings, which, you know, is fine. I've done some watercolors in my life, and I think it's a really beautiful medium. But it's kind of noticeable to me the way that they'll kind of shy away from even talking about, you know, purely like drawings. You know, someone's asking about site size, which is a kind of fundamental feature of the Florence Academy. thing about site size is that it's really important that you gain a sense of the big impression first. So it's important that you don't just, for instance, just draw the feet first, or just, if this were in site size, you can't just draw the eye first. You have to gain a sense of the whole construction of the head. But this is maybe a longer discussion than maybe we have time for here. How do you first enter the gallery scenario? Oh, that's a good question. I mean, every artist kind of wants to know that. I wanted to know it. And, you obviously you have to work on yourself a lot. You have to work on your work, and that's the beginning of the equation. But the second part, I find, more than anything, is just networking. It's not maybe the most romantic idea that, like, it's nice to consider that if you're a good artist, you just wind up in a gallery and then they do all the work for you. But in my experience, and I know that everybody's has a little bit of a different one, it's been more about, like, meeting people and talking with people, and some of those people eventually are the ones that you wind up working with in galleries. I mean, there is the odd time that you show in a group show and just a relationship kind of starts out of that, but it's not always that way. The best book? Well, there's a lot of good books. It's a lot of good books, and it's a very relevant question. I mean, how do you kind of start out? I think that the reality is probably the best way to learn to draw. Actually, let me rephrase that, because I'm not someone who feels like there's one way to learn to draw, or even that there is necessarily a best way. Everybody kind of comes to this with such a different background and perspective. It's hard to say that, like, one size is going to fit all. So even just to answer the one question of what book is the best. So yes, it would be very challenging to say the best way. There are some good ways. But I think even more so than a book, the thing that you want to do at first is just to gain what I would call the kind of mileage, which is to say that like, just get 100 drawings under your belt. Just get enough experience to where you're familiar with the medium that you're drawing in. It's the same thing with oil paint. The truth is, I think you gotta do about 100 heads before you start to, like, know well enough how to work that you can say that you're really kind of learning to draw. So there's books that are great, but I think that even more important than books, probably way more important than books, is mileage, the time that you spend drawing. And that's the thing that, of course, everybody has to conquer on their own, because there's a certain degree of resistance that comes when you're learning how to draw. It's hard to spend 6 hours a day drawing when you're not necessarily yet very good at it. But most artists that I know are tenacious. And it's that tenacity that was it's that tenacity that really is the kind of secret ingredient to, I think, learning to draw. All the theories and books in the hands of a tenacious person would be really, really useful. And it's the books, I think, that are highly available. I think probably even the Florence Academy has like a recommended reading list that's already kind of out there in the world, that you can just look up online, I think. But my advice to you learning would be tenacious and kind of work on the long view, which is to say, like, I've seen the tiling method. Yeah, well, yeah, I do very much kind of think about value shapes in terms of like, we're talking about with tiles that we're talking about planes of value. And this is the idea like that when you're trying to make something look round, but with a degree of like specificity, you need to focus on like where it's becoming like round. So here, 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 and here. These are all plane shifts that I'm trying to make appear soft, but also not too soft, right? So it's kind of a combination I'm trying to produce. And usually I think that's one of the really hard things in drawing, is to kind of find that sweet moment where it is both a soft and kind of sensitive drawing with a lot of atmosphere, and also a drawing that has convincing enough sense of structure that it's really really believable. Does that make sense? All right. I've been asked a couple of times to teach watercolor workshops, and it's like, you know, with painting, oil painting and drawing, like, I've been training so long at it and teaching it so long that I have a very like clear and easily communicated process that I could kind of let people in on. I always feel like with watercolor, like I'm just as much a novice as most other people, so I feel like I wouldn't have a lot to share as far as like wisdom about watercoloring. But maybe one day, maybe if I really get to, hey, you know who you should, if you really like watercolor, the person to check out is an artist called Mario Robinson. He's fantastic. He's really, really excellent. And he's been in the watercolor game for a long time. Well, anyway, I make him sound too old. He's not that old, but he's really, really got a lot to say about it, and I think he's a really great guy, a really great resource as well. Listen, everybody, thank you so much for coming. Take it easy, all right? Bye.